Hello dear friends. Today we will listen to an interview with a German soldier who witnessed the battles near Brest and Kiev, and he will also tell us about Operation Bag Ration. All photos that will be shown in this video are taken from his personal archive. Don't forget to rate the video and leave your comments. Well, we are starting.
Please tell a little about yourself, when you were born, where, what school you went to, how you lived before the war.
I was born on November 6, 1918 in the ancient city of Wels, in Austria. I went first to elementary school, then to middle school. It was a time of unemployment, and then I simultaneously learned to be a tailor. In 1939, on November 1st, I was drafted into the Wehrmacht. First he was trained in Linz, then he served in the 45th Division.
How long did the military training continue?
From November to February 1940. In February-March we were sent to the front line in Hesse, in Germany. And from there we participated in the campaign in France.
What do you remember about the Anschluss of Austria in 1938? How did it happen?
Fine. German troops came, entered the country. Calm entry of troops, without fighting.
How do you personally take it? Were the Germans then enemies for you, or not?
We were all hoping that we would get a job now. We had a lot of unemployed people.
Did you get into the 45th Division immediately after training?
Yes. She was in Linz.
When you fighted in France, was it hard?
Yes, when we were first brought into action, the battles were relatively heavy. When the first crossing of the river took place, it was also very difficult, unusual and not easy. There was also a strong artillery shelling. They also fired from small arms.
And who was your rank during the French campaign?
Shooter.
In 1941 you were transferred from France to Warsaw. How did you take it?
There were two possibilities. First, we were friends with Russia, yes, that very Hitler-Stalin pact, because of which some of the comrades assumed that we would get permission to pass through Russia to the south. This was one version. The second version was this: I had to go to the command post. And there was a woman and she briefly recounted to me what she had heard on the English radio. That is, as if there will be a war between Germany and Russia. I didn't expand on it, because I would be in trouble, you know? If I said this somewhere, it would be a huge deal. This woman must have been from the French resistance.
When did you understand that the war with Russia is now begin?
But we didn't understand it.
Even June 22, 1941.
We didn't understand it. The day before, we were in the forest under Białystok, on the border. I was in contact with the company commander, and he told me that there was about to be a war with Russia. And I answered him that we must hope that it would not turn out the way Napoleon did. We were silent, and then he explained to me that we were already in the very position from which we would attack.
What can you remember about the last minutes of the world? How did the transition to war happen?
Last minutes? Transition? Yes, it was already late in the evening, and at 4 in the morning it had already begun, so we didn't have much time for worries. When we were in France, in Brittany, there was a night bombing that destroyed the train station. We cleared it, and there I found this cross. And he said to me, "Save me, and I will protect you." This cross was with me throughout the war in Russia. On June 22nd, I pulled it out of a bread bag and prayed.
Were you scary? What did you feel?
I didn't have the feeling that it was bad. There was a feeling that everything would be fine. I believed.
It is known that on June 22 the Brest fortress was a very strong German artillery raid. Your comment as a witness?
Yes, that's exactly what he was. Then at 6 in the morning we, our battalion, crossed the Bug River in rubber boats. As for the preliminary preparation for this, we had only one training session somewhere near Warsaw. On a terrain reminiscent of Brest, we crossed the river. This is all. Then a battle broke out, but we had no losses. Apparently, the point was that we were advancing from the other side of Brest, not from the side of the fortress. We went to height 140, took it and covered it. And they shot, there, further. So for me, Brest was not the hardest battle. In Varovo, it was hard there. And on the Berezina, a quick capture. And also, Pepper. And Yagodin.
Do you thought the war would end quickly? Or everything there was a presentation that it would be for a long time?
In 1941, we did not assume anything. We hoped that everything would be fast, but when winter came, it turned out differently. In addition, we knew in advance that Russia is a huge country.
Can you remember the first Russian soldier you saw? Alive or dead? What was the impression?
Alive. A prisoner near Brest. Well, we were soldiers, and envied him, that for him the war, thank God, had already ended. It was only later that we found out that there were thousands and thousands of Russians whom we could not provide for in any way.
When there was the most prisoners? On the first day or later?
Those whom I myself saw on the first day, there were not so many of them. 100. Maybe 200. Then for some time I didn't see any prisoners at all, because our battalion was loaded onto a plane and transported to Minsk. We guarded the airfield there.
How many days was you in Brest?
5 days. 5, 6. Well, up to 10 for sure.
Your company commander, Oberleutnant Milner, died there. Did you see how it was?
I was his liaison, I crossed the border with him. I didn't see how he died. There was an intersection, he got out to take pictures, and he was shot.
Was it after Brest or in Brest?
In Brest itself. And then our former President Kirchschliger took command of the company. Interesting, right?
Do you remember anything about the Russian armored train and cavalry from the environment?
Ah, an armored train. Near Pinsk, by the river. Yes, there we knocked out the first Russian armored train. Lieutenant Berger was also killed then. This was 3 or 4 weeks after the start of the war. But I didn't see that lineup. My first, I saw at Yagodin. Only there was no cavalry at all, only a Russian armored train.
Tell me about the fights for Kiev.
I did not participate there. I was in Berezin and Yagodina. 4 or 5 Russian armored trains operated there, officers, a women's battalion. There was a road, then a forest and wheat fields, and through them, a railway to Yagodin. We covered her. And there it went to a breakthrough of 200,000 Russians. I found out because I was connected. An incredible number of Russians were moving towards us. We couldn't shoot that much. When they attacked, and their infantry began to shoot at us, my friend simply climbed into the bush and let them past him. Because he would not have had enough cartridges for all the cartridges, the Russians were too much. We retreated into the forest, and in it we began negotiations with the Russian commissar. They seemed to want to give up, but it seems there was a misunderstanding with the translator. We thought they wanted to give up, and they thought we were giving up. It was just with our battalion. There, in the forest, we lost many. The Yagodin settlement cost us 400 people. The result was this: it was already getting dark, we were in the forest, and the Russians walked around it on the outskirts, on the other side. And when we got out of there, we ended up in an open place, where we lost even more soldiers. In our company, one was wounded in that field. An orderly was sent for him, and our orderlies were usually priests, and he was generally killed. Then they sent 3 more, and they were also killed. The guy was never pulled out. Then the Oberfeldwebel said that we were all stupid, and he went there himself. And he, too, was killed, only on the way back. All in the head. Sniper. Good thing they didn't send me. We were then commanded by Oberleutnant Misk, a Berliner.
How do you evaluate the fighting spirit of the Russians in June near Brest, and then near Kiev?
The fights were equally tough.
Possible, during the war, the fighting spirit of soldiers changed. They started to give up more and less, when they started to understand that they were not so bad.
No. The Russian soldier, like the German one, just wants to go home. If he is surrounded, he will try everything just to break out of the environment. Because he wants to go home, you understand?
Have you seen that the Russians surrender in large groups, battalions, regiments, divisions?
I can't say that. I was connected, and far from always being right on the battlefield.
But have you heard something?
Sometimes yes, in the encirclement near Kiev, in the same Brest, entire companies surrendered, but I myself did not see this. You need to ask tank commanders, in tank divisions, they had the most prisoners. We are the infantry, we were the last to come.
What impressed you most when you come to Russia?
First, thatched roofs. And there were pickles everywhere.
In Russia then the life of ordinary people was so hard. Why have you came to destroy the poor?
I didn't think about it. Yes, we saw poor people, but we did not think about it.
How was the civil population welcome to you? Some say they have well, some say they won't. How did you personally be?
Personally, I had no problems with the civilian population. For example, when we were advancing, I went through several villages alone. I received an order from the commander to catch up with our convoy, the kitchen, in some settlement. It was in Ukraine. I was looking for this convoy, and they told me that it was in such and such a place. And when I came to this village, the Russian population greeted me with eggs and butter. And I had to drink a raw egg. Then some German major drove up and shouted at me, "What am I doing here and why alone in the village?" I replied that I had an order, to find a convoy. Then it turned out that this village had not yet been occupied by the Germans. In general, I was lucky that nothing happened.
Were the Russian population afraid of the Germans?
Like everywhere else. There were many who were for the communists, there were also those who were for us. But in general, I have never had any problems with the locals. There was an exchange, food, tobacco. And then I was transferred to the battalion headquarters. It was always located 1,000 meters from the front line, and there, in general, relations with the civilian population always existed. For example, in Stalino we stood as much as 10 kilometers from the front line, and we communicated very closely with the locals. There were no troubles. In relation to the population, for example, once we lived in the same house with a Russian family, 3 kilometers from the front line. Everything was great with them too. We had flour, we gave it to them, and they baked bread for us. And there was also a teacher from Moscow. When she saw an excellent aerial photograph of her city with us, a lot of houses, streets, and so on, she said that this was propaganda, that this could not be.
Were you also a connectivity at the battalion headquarters?
Yes, I've always been connected. Radio operator, telephonist and liaison.
A signaler. Not related.
It depends. At the headquarters of the battalion there was an information half-platoon, in German, Staffel. And in the information half-platoon he was a liaison officer, you understand. If a line was needed, a line was laid. If not, they sent a messenger. From 1941 to 1942, I was a company liaison officer, and then I became a battalion. At first he was assigned to the 4th Heavy Machine Gun Company with MG heavy machine guns, and then these heavily armed 4th companies were divided everywhere, and their weapons were distributed among the first 3 companies. Therefore, we, company liaison officers, were transferred to the battalion headquarters.
Did you have any codes for talking, a secret language?
That's why I went through special training in Hesse. There I was once punished. When we were transferred to the front, my friend, he is no longer alive, unfortunately, and I stayed in Kassel for 2 nights, without informing the authorities about this, and 3 others had already arrived. And, as soon as we appeared, we were immediately punished. They sent us from the 4th company to the mortars. There I was given weapons, 2 boxes of equipment and a telephone. And I had to deliver a message and run a telephone line between their 2 positions. On this training march, I shamefully lost 1 box of equipment, because I no longer had the strength to carry it. Then I went to the Oberleutnant and told him that I was a tailor and had never learned how to carry such coffins. He yelled at me, said that there was no place for such people in the army, and sent me to the medical board. There I was recognized as fit, but weak. And after that I was only his personal contact. Oberleutnant_Milner, who fell in Brest. Then I was wounded, I was in a hospital in Kiev for some time, and when I returned to the front, I met a friend at the headquarters of the regiment. I asked him if they needed a tailor at the regimental headquarters. He said yes, and for a while I actually was a tailor there. Then, after reassignment, he was a radio operator, telephone operator and liaison officer at the battalion headquarters.
When you was a company communicant, was the main objective to keep in connection with the platoons or with the battalion?
From the advanced positions, to the battalion and to the regiment.
Did you personally relate the messages?
or personally carried, or on the phone, or on the radio, depending on the combat situation.
You have been hurt. How and when did this happen?
Yes. In the winter of 1942, not far from Kamarichi, we were attacked by Russian tanks, about 50 pieces. We retreated, and the whole regiment lost their weapons. It could end up in a tribunal. We collected all the weapons that were left, and tried to win back the one thrown under the Comrades. That's where I got hurt.
How did you save from the cold in the winter of 1941?
We had summer uniforms, there were no winter uniforms. We were in Yeliets until December. Then they retreated to Livny. During the retreat there were a lot of frostbite. We wanted to celebrate Christmas, but we had nothing. In Livny, we partially received winter uniforms, they were dropped from aircraft. But it was too late and not enough. I, as someone who knows how to sew, was then forced to mass-produce gloves myself.
Have there been cases when the local population gave you warm clothes? Or maybe you have something yourself?
No, nothing at all. I personally don't. We didn't have that opportunity. We were retreating, the Russians were chasing us. We just wanted to be safe. We leave the village, the Russians enter there. We couldn't stop. The cavalry was on the heels of chasing, retreating 100 kilometers at a run. There was neither time nor opportunity. There were no contacts at all with the local population at that time.
Did you always have hot food in the winter of 1941?
There was, but very little. When they retreated, there was practically none, they didn't eat anything for 3 days. Once we went to a Russian house, the owners were there. Food, cooked, chicken, a pot of stew. Probably prepared to meet the Red Army. It happened once, and that was by accident. In France, when we attacked, we checked that handkerchiefs were there, collars were clean, protective equipment. But here, the soldiers of the German army had nothing. Photos from Stalingrad, have you seen it? That's how we were then. And when it passed, we were supposed to become elegant again.
What was the moral of the German army? What did you talk about, what you thought?
Comrade said that we hit hard. There is such a book, Shot in the Head in Front or Execution from Behind, a Russian major who commanded a penal battalion. At first he had 500 or 600 people under him, and only 3 remained. We had exactly the same.
Have you heard anything about German penalty unit?
There was a penal battalion. In the prisoner of war camp where I ended up, there was a communist who ended up in a penal battalion. That's why I know he existed. That communist was our foreman when we mined coal in Stalino. In the summer of 1944, on the Berezina, I accidentally heard a conversation on the radio at night that in a couple of hours a group of German soldiers should run across to the Russians. So, he was the commander of this platoon. 16 people were under his command, and with them he himself wanted to run across. But they had one Russian in their platoon, and this Russian betrayed them. Oberleutnant, his name was Matsuhato.
Did you have heavy? This is Russian volunteer assistance.
Yes, in the kitchen. Here is one of them and passed them. And this Oberleutnant in 1933 in Berlin was a deputy from the communists.
Heavy had a weapon.
No, I don't think so. I did not see.
When did they appear in the Wehrmacht?
In 1942.
According to our information, after the defeat near Moscow, the morale of the German army has significantly declined. When was she recovered again?
It's a personal feeling, it's different for everyone. Personally, here in Livny, I had a conversation on the radio, we were attacked by Russian tanks, we need artillery fire. And the artillery commander answered me that they had only 7 shots. 3 they need to shoot, and 4 they can shoot to kill. And that's it, they have nothing else. At that moment, I and other comrades said, well, what else does it mean ? We have nothing. And after Stalingrad, it was already clear to everyone that the case was lost. Everywhere was the same. For example, as I said, in Yagodina. There was a message that 200,000 Russians were advancing. The reaction is this, it can't be, disappear, I don't want to see you, you're kidding me. It was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And at 5 o'clock there was already a question, Mr. Ulrich, why didn't you come out with your heavy weapons? Presumably, the same thing happened in Stalingrad. The pilot, a major, reported to the Führer's headquarters that Russian tanks were advancing in countless numbers. They said he was joking. Time and time again, management did not want to see reality. It did not believe in the infantry at all, and this meant that the infantry was an ass.
In the summer of 1942 the German army again. Moods, improved.
No, as I said, everything was clear after 1941. And the commanders, too, who were not in the party, they understood.
Have you heard about the order on commissioners?
About the fact that the commissars should be shot? I personally never heard of this order in the war. In our division it was not read out.
When did you find out about it?
Already home. And even if such an order even existed, we would not do it. You see, if there was any way to prevent this, we would prevent it. I'm only talking about my environment now. Maybe in some other regiment there were Nazi fanatics, then yes, the commissars would have been shot.
Propaganda in the German army and the image of the enemy. Were there any posters, leaflets about bad Russian, Bolshevik or something else?
No, I can't remember.
In the Russian army they were given vodka and alcohol. And you? If yes, how often?
Yes, they did. Not to keep warm or attack, but as an additional ration. Not every day, it's different. Like chocolate. Or, for example, in Stalino in the winter of 1942, we were once given 1 orange each. From the Italians, probably got it by accident.
Were any problems with lice?
About. In huge quantities. In huge ones.
And how did you fight them?
Only hands. There was nothing else, no powders, no ointment, nothing. After we retreated from Ilyets to Livan for 3 weeks, we saw a cleaning point, and company after company was decontaminated in it. Such points were of 2 types, stationary and mobile, on cars.
Photos, did you do it? Or do you have a photographer?
No. Others took pictures and took pictures. They just gave me.
The soldiers were supposed to vacation.
Yes, every year. 3 weeks. Personally, I went home. Transfers for trains with vacationers were in Konotop and Kursk, depending on where you are going. After the holidays it was hard to go to the front again. Therefore, there were those who did not return to their unit at all. Look where they were from. In the mountains, you can still hide, but on the plain, there is no chance.
Was you just returning to your company for this?
You see, I am a very flexible person. I went to church, the Lord told me, you will return home, and with that the question was closed for me, the topic was settled. Personally, I have somehow not particularly over something like this thought. I believe that I would return.
What can you say about partisans? Well, and about the nature of this phenomenon?
Yes, during the war we always knew that they existed. But we were a frontline unit, we ourselves did not encounter them. The fact that I changed my mind about it later, at home, is that the invader cannot be a friend. Presumably, many partisans were brought up among the Kivs, they were not treated very well with us, and for sure many of them once went to the partisans. I don't know. Already after the war, I heard that the German army took away clothes, things, food, livestock from the Russian population. That's probably why, too. However, in the Russian prisoner of war camp it was the same. Once the 3 of us tried to reach a Russian security officer, he was in a neighboring village, in order to give him a bribe. Well, to improve our supply. But, while we were making our way to it, everything was taken away from us along the way. And in the German army it was the same, the supply did not reach those to whom it was intended. It didn't reach us or the population. I don't know exactly how it was, this is what I think now.
The Russian offensive in the summer of 1944 was unexpected, or did you know about it?
That summer we occupied positions on the Berezina, in the forest. Around June 22, a large Russian offensive was launched. But it was not with us, but there, further. We have heard from others, but we ourselves have not yet been affected by it. I was delivering a report, and met several military men. They all said the Russians were coming. I returned to the commander, I said, Mr. Oberleutnant, Russian offensive. He told me, yes, you're joking. There, on the Berezina, swamps. They probably drowned out the explosions of shells. We didn't hear the shooting much. We did not announce an alarm from above. Then we proactively withdrew to a reserve position. In the afternoon, the platoon commander told me that his superiors were sending me to reconnoiter the situation. I went to the next village. Gradually, along the way, the shooting became more and more audible. There I met 2 Germans, they knew nothing. I went back, and saw the battalion liaison officer, who was also sent to reconnoiter the situation. But he had no idea what was going on. Then I went to the positions of the regiment. And only there I found out that we were surrounded, and the whole Bobruisk, too. It was time for lunch here. It was 3 in the afternoon, I know for sure. I was going back to the battalion, but then they warned me that, presumably, the Russians were coming here along the same road that I had come. It was all in the positions of the regiment. We began to think about how to get out of here. We retreated, and in the evening a message came to the regiment that, since Bobruisk was in Russian hands, we should make our way to the 4th Army. We walked along the railway line, and in one village, met a boy, tried to find out from him how we could break through. Then they got into the swamp. Then, between the 2 villages, we met a group of officers, and they told us that we had to go in that direction. Let's go there. And they already thought that they had broken through, but in the end they met the Russians. I had to return to this village. There we met the elder. He also confidently said that we must go in that direction. We said, "Are you laughing? There are Russians there." We ended up going into the woods. We saw the Germans there. Thousands of soldiers, staff officers, generals. It was said that the Russians occupied the Mogilev-Bobruisk road. We crossed over it, I no longer know where it was, and there really were Russians all around. Then we went to the forest road. And already there, moving further along it, they heard that someone was singing our song. Then one of them says to me, "This is something strange. Trap. The Germans are not so stupid, and it sounds with a Russian accent." But we called them and they responded. It turned out they were Germans. There were 7 of us, with a young lieutenant. We discussed the situation. We decided that the homeland is there. At night they tried to break through. At about 12 o'clock in the morning a plane flew right over us. And then the Russian commissar comes right at us. Everyone lay down without moving. It worked out. Well, let's go to the wheat field.
And all the same you was terrible to be captived.
Yes. It would be like the Russians near Kiev, hands up. Then they met German infantrymen with a lieutenant. He immediately told me, "Where is your weapon?" Then we hid in the field where the harvesters were. Russians passed by, and, presumably, they shot this lieutenant. We fled as it got dark, and for 2 days I walked west alone. There was a forest again, then a field again. Then I saw 4 people. One shouted, "Germany." And I recognized one of the German dialects. These were 4 German staff officers, with red stripes. They asked me where I was from. I told. They also asked where my weapons were, then they said that since I am without him, then I must be from Russian captivity, and therefore I am hungry, I want to eat. Went with them. We moved along the Berezina, passed the airfield, crossed the river, entered the forest. The officers said that we had to be careful, since they attacked the Russians that night, and every Ivan they met would now kill us. Here appeared not one Ivan, but 2 whole companies. We hid in the forest, and dusk fell again. But suddenly 7 Russian soldiers came out to us, and they seized us. They caught us because the commander of this Russian section was in German captivity, and he knew that German officers used cologne. They smelled his scent. The officers were taken somewhere, I don't know, but I was sent to a collection point and interrogated there. Interrogated, fellow countryman, from Linz. In 1933, he took part in clashes with the Nazis, and then left for Russia. He was a communist, served in the Red Army and interrogated me. From somewhere he recognized my voice and said, "Hey, you. I know you, where are you from?" He, of course, wanted to ask me how it was back home. Then he said that, on Stalin's orders, all German prisoners of war were assigned to work. That although they go to Siberia, they go to work, that no one else is shot. They gave me some food and left me alone. Then we were all sent to Bobruisk, and from there by train to Moscow, on the march of prisoners. We stayed there for 4 or 5 days. This was in July 1944.
Where was you in Moscow before this march?
Presumably, it was a hippodrome. First we were at the former fire station, I don't know where they gave us some food. Then we had to line up in lines of 24 or 30 people, I don't remember, and so we marched around Moscow. The officers are in front, we are in the back. Which streets, I don't know. We arrived at the Kursk railway station. There the German officers were to take command. Then 1,200 people were loaded onto a train, and the train left.
Were you protected by Russian soldiers?
I did not see it myself, but others said that the population rushed to the prisoners. True, where I went, this was not the case. Russian soldiers were supposed to protect us. But I didn't see it.
What do you see? How do the people of the capital think you? Someone screamed something. Or watched silently.
We didn't look anywhere. They just marched, detachedly. Without any thoughts. Like the dead. It was all over, and we went into captivity. No thoughts and no feelings. Then I ended up in a coal mining brigade. Then for 2 months he altered things for the Russian commissar, which he took in Germany. Later he was in the village, worked on the land with Russian peasants. In September they harvested corn. Then, in 1945, all the prisoners were gathered back to the camp. They said everyone was going home. German cooks were there, they baked cookies, there was a commissar, 2 or 3 nurses, officers, I still don't know who, about 20 people from the authorities. The commissar said that it was all over, and we were going home. And in November 1945, on my birthday, I was at home. Birthday gift.
Did you read the order on the surrender of Germany? How did you receive it?
Yes, you read it. After all, we also had political information, and there was a commissar, not a communist, by any means. They even arranged an evening for us with music and dancing. The girls were Yugoslav, from a neighboring camp.
Among you surely were people from the anti-fascist movement.
Yes, that Oberleutnant and 2 more communists. My brigadier was read since before the Nazi times, from Schlesien, Walter Lohr. In general, he had no privileges. There was a photograph from the newspaper where his wife meets the Red Army with flowers. He showed this photo to the authorities in the camp, and they said that it might be true, or maybe not. The communists did not have any significant benefits in the camp. Presumably, this Walter Lohr was then the police commissioner of East Berlin, but I do not know for sure.
What thoughts did you visit in captivity? You and your comrades.
Yes, no one there was thinking about anything special. One once said that if he knew that he would be captured, then every morning he would eat a sandwich with marmalade.
What did you fear the most of all, to be major, killed or to be POW'd?
A very difficult question. I already said, I am very labile. That's why I didn't think about it. There were many who thought. Me not.
Did you have awards for the war?
Yes, melee, Iron Cross and infantry attack.
And for the winter campaign of 1941, ice cream meat?
Yes, here it is in the photo.
Did you receive money as a soldier?